It is 8 p.m. Eastern. It is ASTV. We are back for more talk of Liverpool Football Club. And we are joined tonight by Trevor, and we are joined by Rami. Trevor, how are you?
Spectacular.
Rami, how are you?
I'm good. Happy to be here. It's my first Thursday podcast, so
excellent stuff. Well, you don't have to set the bar too high, but you're going to be disappointed, just so you know. So we don't have James tonight with his 60-second news, but we did have a good piece of news, I think, today, fresh off the press, as they used to say in the old days, of Scoops, McKenzie, etc. Young Bajcetic has signed a new contract. He looks promising. He looks like he could do the job we've needed from Fabinho. Trevor, what do you think of that news?
Yeah, it's a guy that we've all kind of, since he's made his way into the first team, hoping he gets more opportunities. And now he's locked in till 2027. I can't say nothing but good things about this. Let's just hope that he can stay healthy and this doesn't become another dud deal down the road.
Rami, I don't want to kind of make a blast from the past, but it almost feels like he's the player we thought we were going to get with Grujic, doesn't it?
Yeah, it kind of similar profile for sure. But like Trevor mentioned, it's good to lock down your good young players for the future. Especially a player like that, he kind of fits the profile of what we're missing right now. And so, like I said, you can step in for Fabinho if needed. So it's good. In years past, you kind of worry about Liverpool's best young players leaving. So it's good just to have them locked down.
So let me throw a little question about Bajcetic there as well, because he said, he could step in for Fabinho, but we're not really looking for players to step in for players anymore. We were looking for them to actually make that position their own. Do you think he's capable of it?
I think he is, honestly. Maybe not in the near future, but I think he has that potential to be. Personally, I see him more as an 8, like a play like Henderson's role. But I think he can step in and do Fabinho's job once he maybe gets a little bit physically bulks up a little bit and becomes more comfortable in that position. But I don't see why not. He has all the tools and the technical ability to do it for sure.
Trevor, what do you think? Is it a case of he should be biding his time, or should he do a George Best stroke Michael Owen stroke Robbie Fowler and try and grab that shirt while he's young and hot?
Yeah, I think it's that old grab the brass ring adage where you have that opportunity in front of you, and Fabinho's value both within the team and in the overall football landscape is probably at its lowest since he's been with the club. So if there was any time for Bajcetic to really come in and just try to cement himself as not the heir apparent, but just the guy that's there now, give him the opportunity. And because we talked about this last week, it's not an experimentation time, but it is a time for guys to really just, if they get those chances, to make the most of them.
It's almost not that we have that current golden era, but it's almost like the Steven Gerrard thing back in the early 2000s, isn't it? You can see the promise, but you're kind of hoping he's just going to break out and just own a whole game all by himself at the big level. That makes you think, wow, this is the player we've wanted. What do you think, Rami?
Yeah, in years past, that's kind of how our youth players have came onto the scene. Trent, I believe Nathaniel Klein got injured, and Trent just hopped in and made that role his own. So yeah, who knows? He could just get thrown in, and I thought that goal against Aston Villa for me was just kind of like that was like the springboard. I felt like that was kind of the moment that yes, he's arrived, and so I think his ceiling is very high, very massive, and I'm excited to see where his career goes. Hopefully, at least till 2027. Thankfully, we have him locked down. But yeah, hopefully it's with us and he just continues to improve because the signs are definitely there. You definitely see a good young player. Most young players, you can just tell instantly if they have it or if they don't. And I think he definitely has it for sure.
Trevor, He is locked down to 2027. Do you think Klopp does what he sometimes does with the young players and sticks them out on loan, or do you think he's going to make them come to train every day and impose himself on the team?
Yeah, and I think that's going to come down to what the player kind of wants as well. If Jurgen comes to him and goes, "Hey, I can give you every other game, or I can make sure that you're getting in the cups or stuff like that," and there's kind of that communication between Bajcetic and Klopp of, "Hey, I know I'm not in here to just play every day and to get all of the minutes in either one of the kind of midfield pivot positions." And if that works well for him, cool. And then they kind of go about that with that squad depth. If not, they can find a situation that works for him with another club, because they have that now 4 years of leeway where he can go out for a year and it's not going to necessarily crush him in terms of his stature within the club.
Overall, I think for a season that has so many ups and downs, and probably more downs at the moment than ups, that sign is pretty much good news for us right now, isn't it?
Yeah, I'd say so. It's one of those things where you kind of want to take the silver linings in the season, and this is definitely one of them where there's guys that you want to step up and haven't, and then this kid's kind of come out of nowhere, unless you like are hardcore following the youth teams up and down. You only heard kind of whispers about this kid, and now he's kind of come in and just cemented himself as a part of the team, and a pretty much regular part of the rotation in that midfield that can't be denied.
So let's move on to the first topic of the week. It is Mohamed Salah. So he hasn't performed to his usual high standards. Kind of probably to be expected with number one, his age. Number two, his body, probably still not recovering from the last 2 or 3 years. But also, we talked before about his new position and the tactics we've been using. But here's the controversial question, I think, that we possibly need to ask ourselves. Is he coming to the end, as all great strikers do, Rami?
Let me preface this by saying that I'm Egyptian as well, so anything I say should be taken with a little bit of grain of salt, because I'm gonna be biased towards my countrymen. But I will say this: I think, having watched him his whole career, he has lost that bit of step of pace. I feel like that's kind of made him special. Technically with the ball, passing, shooting, all that, it's still there. It just had that worry of he lost that bit of pace. But like you said, I feel like he's playing a different role this season than he has in years past. He's playing a bit wider. I feel like that's kind of to make way for Nunez, let him make the runs through the middle. So I think he's kind of adjusting to that. And also, it doesn't help with sometimes you don't know what midfielders are going to be playing behind you. He's kind of been the only staple in the front line. You don't know who else he's going to be playing with up top. So I think just that bit of instability hasn't really helped him. I think once we got if you look at that stretch where he scored the hat trick against Rangers, he had I believe it was 7 goals in 5 games, something like that. And that stretch was when we were probably more stable. Like the lineup was the same, it didn't really change much, and the tactics were pretty compact. And so when you have that, I think he's just the type of player who thrives off of stability. When you have different lineups every week, it just kind of, I think he's going to struggle just like any good player would. I think it's still way too early to write him off. I think what needs to happen is, I think Klopp and the staff need to kind of reevaluate where Mo's best position is. Because in the future, it might be through the center, but then you already have Nunez and Firmino and Jota who already play there. So it's can he really play there? So, and he's really our only right-sided player at this moment in the club, if we're being honest. So for me, I don't think he's finished. I think, you hear whispers online that's oh, he signed his contract, so now he's taking it easy. I think that's a bit unfair. I think when you watch the games, he's always the one that's pressing. He's always the one that's running, getting back. It's just that, I feel like right now nothing's working for the squad as it is, and I think he's just a side effect of that.
Trevor, we talked about his new position being out wide, but traditionally, if a player stays that wide and hugs the touchline, you expect crosses into the middle of the box for somebody else. But we don't see him do that an awful lot, do we? He still tries to cut back in. It's just that he's cutting almost horizontally in rather than at that angle that he was so great at when we were challenging for the league and winning the league. You know, he made that diagonal run, got on his left foot and popped that ball into the far corner. Is it? Do you think maybe a blunder on the part of the coaching staff to have him play that role, but not have a specific task for him to do out there?
Yeah, and that's something where if you look at his numbers for where he's playing and his ability to pass the ball, for him to only have 4 assists in the league seems just a bit off. And if he's not scoring goals and they're going to ask him to be that far out to make that space for Darwin or whatever kind of amalgamation they're doing with the front 3 or 4, there has to be more from Mo in terms of being that facilitator. And I'm not sure that it's not, I don't think it's not a willingness to do so. It's just he's been asked to be the talismanic goal scorer for this club for so long. There's just going to be that kind of shift in mentality that I don't think he's reached yet, where it's not that we're not asking him not to score anymore, but that has to kind of be like a 1A 1B thing, not one is shooting, coming in, what you just described, coming in with those diagonals and those pop shots to the far corner with his great left foot, but being able to kind of, if you're going to make those kind of cuts as well, now have your head on a swivel for a pass, where normally he wasn't asked to do that in the past.
Rami, in terms of, because as you said, he's your countryman, so you've probably followed him more on the international scene than we have. What is the perception of his performance for Egypt? Has that also had a similar downturn, or is he still maintaining the same standards?
Yeah, no, there's been a bit of frustration as well with the national team. There's like this sentiment kind of that, oh, he cares about Liverpool more than the national team because he scores for Liverpool and doesn't score as much with the national team. And so you do see a lot of parallels because with the national team, he plays very wide and he's always double teamed because, the rest of our team isn't great. And so he's always gets that extra bit of attention. So you do see a lot of parallels between that and then this season's Liverpool, where he is always very wide. Most of the time, he's trying to dribble between 2 guys, 2 defenders, and it just, I feel like he's not getting the support with the Egyptian national team. And you're starting, like I said, you see it with Liverpool. He's just not getting that support, getting him in these dangerous areas. Like I said, I don't know if that's a system thing or if that's just him, trying something different. And I want to make note of a comment you made that yes, I think he is being asked to be more of a playmaker. But I mean, last season he led the league in assists, and for us to try to change his role to make him more of a playmaker, it seems kind of counterintuitive when it's like he already led the league in assists last season from the role he was already playing. So I'm sure he can create from a little bit more inside, and with Trent overlapping, I think that's where he's most dangerous. And so I don't know. I hope it is just a system thing, and it's just a lack of stability thing, and that he hasn't just gone. It's not the beginning of the end, like they say.
Trevor, I found an interesting statistic last week that strikers or attackers who score 25 goals or more per season in the league, so basically the top scorers that are challenging for the top places in the league, will generally start falling off that threshold at about 29-30, and then the exception, I believe, of Alan Shearer and one other whose name I can't remember right now. Pretty much everybody else drops down immensely. Can Salah be the exception, or are we looking at another, crossing their fingers and hoping against hope, like we did with Ian Rush when he came back from Juventus, or with Ian St. John or Roger Hunt back in the 60s? Are we kind of hoping against hope that he would be the exception to the rule?
Yeah, and I agree with what Rami was saying in terms of stability, where if he can get that just same type of lineup up top and just the same expectations every week of, all right, this is what I have to do every week instead of that constant shift in responsibility and the things that he needs to do, I think he can get back not to the level where he was setting records, but he can get back to at least high teens, low 20s in terms of goals. I think this may be a lost year, but I think next year, where some of these guys that we're bringing in are more settled, he can get back up to those kind of probably like medal stand of Golden Boot numbers, kind of like in that bronze medal range of like 19 to 21. I don't think he's going to be scoring 27 to 30 anytime soon. But I think this may just be a year where there was just so much going wrong and there was so much stuff in flux where we just kind of have to like throw this out as an anomaly. And then we get two more, at least high level years of Mo, and we revel in that.
Rami, Trevor makes the point, that this might be a lost year, and then if we can get some stability for Salah next year, we might see him return back to the start. But he will also be a year older and a yard slower next year. Do you think is it something that Klopp and the coaching staff have to look at and completely change the attacking style to make sure he gets into positions where he doesn't have to be as quick, or are they going to persist with the way they play, and we're going to have this conversation next year as well?
I mean, I hope for all of our sake that, something changes. I hope we're not going through the same thing this time next year because, personally, I don't know how much has changed between last year and this year tactically for him specifically. But I would just go back to what they were doing last year. That worked. Like I said, he won the Golden Boot and he won the Playmaker Award. So, if it's not broken, don't fix it. That's kind of my perspective. Also, something else that I don't think is talked about enough is he basically has to play every single game because he doesn't have a real backup. You know what I mean? Hopefully Ben Doe can come in and be that guy, but it's way too early and it's too young to be dependent on for that. So I know we always talk about, I wish we could buy every player in the world, but that's something I've been saying for the last few years. That's kind of, we always talk about like midfielders, or the year we didn't have a center back, we talked about that. But for the longest time, we really didn't have, and we still don't have a backup for Mo that can play the same role as him. And, it's difficult because there's not a ton of left-footed right wingers in the world that play similar to him. And if you are there, you're looking for like 50 to 100 million range. But that's just like a glaring issue I've noticed in the squad, that it's like, God forbid something happens to him tomorrow, who's going to play that role? Is it going to be Harvey Elliott? We start playing him there, or like I said, Ben Doe comes in. That just kind of like. And I think if he starts to maybe gets a legitimate backup and he's going to have to play every game, maybe he'll start to recover that bit of pace and he won't be just like ran into the ground like you're seeing with some of our other players. Like we talked about Fabinho earlier. I think that's what happened with him. He had to play every game and his legs just kind of fell off. And so hopefully that's not what's happening with him, but I wouldn't be surprised if that is part of it.
Trevor, my perception of Salah at his best was almost like, this is the model goal: is we've pressed, the other team have brought the ball into midfield, we press again, and then we win it, and then we set Salah off, and then he either goes one-on-one with the keeper and scores, or he lays it off to Mane to put the ball in the net, or drops it back to Firmino, who's making one of his famous and devastating late runs. But if he doesn't have that pace, we shouldn't really be expecting him to play that way, should we?
No, and I think that's where everybody clamors for the formation change, because it's adapting to your team more than anything. It's realizing that Mo can't do everything that he did in the past, and find new ways to make the most of what he can do still, which is quite a lot. And there's always been people that are like, okay, maybe we try like the two up top with him and Nunez and see if they can kind of just crisscross with one another and make sure there's always a bit of the ball for both of them, and then kind of have your two pivot guys, and then you just kind of have the kind of not necessarily double tens behind them, but guys that can kind of be that link between the two lines, but not being able to find anybody to fill those roles, but whether it just be the poor squad or injuries and not having those guys behind them has kind of just forced Klopp to like go, all right, now we're just going to 4-3-3 till we die, and there's zero wiggle room with it, which kind of stinks and never gives us the opportunity to see if these other formations work to kind of bring the best out of Mo, especially in a partnership with Nunez up top.
Rami, I'm as handsome as I am and clean faced and fresh of hair. I'm an oldie guy. I like to mooch, and who doesn't like to admit it? But I remember back in the 90s, the mid 90s, up into the late 90s, a little bit. The fantastically brilliant and always exciting John Barnes hitting that age watershed and then just getting slower and fatter. But the techniques were still there, so he could still perform the magic. He just couldn't perform the magic at the physical level that we would expect of him. Now, Klopp plays an exceptionally physical game, especially in the defensive phase. Is it? Would it be fair to say that perhaps Salah's decline might actually be a little bit on Klopp for not recognizing that not everybody can play that style after a certain point?
Yeah, I think that would be a fair criticism. Like I mentioned, you look at our midfields, and that's kind of what's happened with them. Is they just kind of played that same way, and it just affected their longevity. Even I look at Firmino as well, just his years of service in that press. I think it's kind of worn him down a little bit. You look at our players, and they're all 28, 29, 30, but they just look a lot older just because, or maybe not like look, but they play a lot older because, yeah, that just, I feel like they've been ran into the ground. And yeah, I think there's a fair criticism of Klopp. But at the end of the day, it's if those players aren't cutting it for you, then you need to find somebody who is, and that might be also a criticism of Klopp. I don't know who if it's the board or whoever, but if you are starting to see that decline, then sorry, maybe if they saw it last year, just don't offer him that contract. If we're being honest, say, okay, yeah, we're starting to see the decline. Thank you for your service here. You've been great, but we need to find somebody younger who can play this way. But like just be a little bit ruthless. Sir Alex Ferguson was really great at that, just being ruthless. Just anytime a player started to show a bit of decline, it was like, thank you, but your time's up here. I appreciate our players a lot. So I think I don't want to be that ruthless, especially with a player that I love to watch. But yeah, I think that is a bit of a fair criticism that, at times I think we just rely on the same players every single week, and it can come back to bite us.
Trevor, in terms of, as Rami said there, Alex Ferguson was ruthless. Bob Paisley had a famous saying is that players can lose their legs, but they can lose them on somebody else's team and on Liverpool's. Is it possible that we actually have seen looked ahead and brought Gakpo in to take the weight of what Salah does, maybe in a slightly different role? Or was Gakpo a completely different strategic buy?
I think, and when I saw it just from, and my experience with Gakpo is very, very minimal outside of a couple of Champions League, either qualifiers or something like that, and the World Cup. Not a big Eredivisie guy here. Sorry to burst that bubble, but it's one of those things where I viewed him as kind of like a Swiss Army knife, where he's a guy that you can put into like any of the four roles that he feels comfortable playing in, and if you need to give a guy a day off, he's like a utility infielder where you're just like, yeah, he's going to be a steady hand, and he showed to be more than that with the Netherlands at the World Cup. But overall, with that step up from the Dutch league to the Premier League, I didn't think he was going to be that world beater that he was in those 4 games. I thought he was more just going to be that guy that covered up kind of our roster deficiencies because he could pretty much play anywhere on the front line and look confident and comfortable doing so.
We talk about Gakpo as a Swiss Army knife player, but there's always that bit of the Swiss Army knife that you don't know what to do with it. So right now, that seems to be what Gakpo's role is, isn't he? He's that bit that you just don't know what to do with it. But Rami,
corkscrew?
Well, you know what to do with a corkscrew, but there's always that one little thing that looks like it might be a nail file or a screwdriver or a small knife, but it's neither and all at the same time. That's the philosophy of the Swiss Army knife. But Rami, let's say everybody gets fit. Jota, Diaz, Bobby, but Bobby's has the same age problem. Nunez, Gakpo, Salah, Harvey Elliott, Doak, Carvalho. Who's our best front three out of those when everybody's fit and raring to go?
Everybody's fit. Let's just pretend like it's beginning of next season. So yeah, they had a summer to play together. I would say that it's Diaz, Nunez, Salah. Still, I think Diaz is still our best left winger. Hopefully, the injury didn't affect his like progression at all. And then Nunez, he's only gotten better with every game, I believe. And I think Salah, like we talked about, I think there's still that player there, and he's still our best right wing because by default there's not another guy. but yeah, no, I think those three, and then you have Gakpo coming in for Diaz, and then Jota for Nunez. And then who knows what's gonna happen with Bobby with his contract situation and all of that. But I think those three are our best front line. Like I said, the only one that's really arguable is I think Jota could come in and do the job for Nunez. I think he's really good at playing that Firmino role, dropping into midfield and leading the press. So that's the only one that I kind of am debating on. But I just think Nunez is just the type of player that, when he's on the field, you always have a chance. He can always create a goal, create chaos, create something. He's just one of those players that, when he plays, I feel like we're always going to score at least one. Whether we keep a clean sheet or score two or whatever is a different story. But I feel like when Nunez plays, we're always going to get one. And so I think right now, those are our best front three.
Trevor, do you agree or disagree? Do you have a different view of it?
No, I wholeheartedly agree that that's our front three. I think Jota is better as a sub as opposed to Nunez. He's a guy that doesn't need to start per se. He can come in 25 minutes and play with that urgency. And I feel the same way about some of these other guys. Like Carvalho has shown that he can not, I don't think he can take that full starting role just yet. But if he can come on and just give you 10 minutes of running like a fucking crazy person, that's something that he's willing and able to do. And whether or not Gakpo just kind of fills the gaps, and I agree also with Rami that until we have somebody to dethrone the Egyptian king over there on the right, whether it be on a semi-regular basis or entirely, he's just got to be the guy over there.
Okay, moving on to the next thing. We're going to talk about now 1,000 games. Apparently, I think there's some dispute about one of the games being the simultaneous one during the World Club Cup. But I'm not too sure about that. But 1,000 games, and I believe he has mentioned this week that he's here for the rebuild. That's his thing. Are we looking to try and make a complete dynasty out of Klopp and have him here for the 15 to 20 years period that Shanks was there, or the 50 odd years or whatever Bob Paisley was at the club, or is there a point coming soon where we have to say that maybe it's time to move on to the next coach, Rami?
So I missed your question. I had some technical difficulties.
I'm not saying again. I was saying Klopp with 1,000 games. Are we looking to create a dynasty with Klopp and have him for 15 to 20 years? Or 1,000 career games managed. Thanks, BJ, Mr. Stats. 1,000 career games, 400 in LFC, still a good number. But my point is he's had difficulties this season. He's had this difficulty before at Dortmund. He's had this difficulty before at Mainz. Are we looking to retain Klopp for as long as possible? Possibly even be his final club, so to speak. Or is there a point coming down the line where we might have to say it's time to look at the next guy?
Yeah, I mean, if we stay on the same trajectory that we're on now, then yeah, it might be a couple of years before we're starting to hear some Klopp outshouts. I mean, you're already starting to hear, which is, I think, a little bit too soon. But, like you mentioned, most of the teams that Klopp's been on, he's left after the 7th season. And he's been the guy to leave. He wasn't fired. So I think he'll be the first to recognize that if he's not the guy that's fit to lead us, then he'll step down. But as more of like a football fan than as a Liverpool supporter, I want to see how he does with a rebuild. He hasn't really had to do that in either of his previous stints as a manager. He's kind of led the team to the top and then left right when the decline started. And so I'll be interested to see how, if we get new owners, with deeper pockets or whatever, see how he approaches that. It'd be really interesting to watch. And whether there's a shift in play style or philosophy or whatever. But if he can figure it out and he takes us back to the levels that we were at even just last season, I'm not against it at all for him staying 10, 15, 20 years. I would be totally for it. Whether he is a totally different question. But I think if he can get us, like I said, back to those levels and has a successful rebuild, then I think he's definitely the guy for us.
Trevor, what do you think? Do you think we see see that period out, or should we be having one eye on the next chapter?
Yeah, I'm here for it for as long as he wants to be here, because I agree with you all that I think he's a guy that can see the writing on the wall and is not going to just keep getting them checks for the sake of it. And yeah, it's one of those things where he's I think he's a guy that's both prideful and respectful, where he respects the club and has too much pride in himself, where if he's not up to his standards and can't not necessarily do things the way he wants to, but be able to lead a club in the fashion that he wants to, and just be at the optimal levels in both management and team relations, or whatever you want to do, the behind the scenes stuff. If he can't tick all those boxes, I think he'll move on. But I'm down for letting him stay as long as he wants to, and until he hits that point.
Rami, is there even anyone who could take over from Klopp?
Yeah, and see, that's the question. That's a $1 million question. If Klopp leaves, who does take over for him? I mean, you look at the grass isn't always greener. You look at Chelsea, for example. They had Thomas Tuchel, and they thought Graham Potter was just going to come in and fix all the problems because he was doing so great with Brighton, and he comes in and has the same problems that Tuchel is having. So like I said, the grass isn't always greener, and like the evil is worse than the one you don't. So we know Klopp, who he is, like how his philosophy is, the type of manager he is. If we were to say get rid of him, you could bring in a guy who's just completely his philosophy is completely the antithesis of the club, and just doesn't believe in any of the same things. And I don't know. I just think that right now he is the man to lead us forward, and it's a shaky period, but there's nobody else I would rather be leading the club through this shaky period. And if, like I said, if we're in here a year or two from now having the same conversation, then we could start to ask questions about his position. But I think right now, I think he has enough credit in the bank from what he's achieved so far that I feel like it's still way too early to even talk about that possibility.
Trevor, the Polish prince has said.
Yeah. Delete that comment.
Frank Lampard is available. There we go. I mean, he is a tactical genius.
Stands that need running.
Sam Muller devices too.
Here's the point I wanted to make, and Brian Shelton makes it. Not Gerrard, he's too emotionally attached. I had arguments with my Liverpool supporting friends way back in the 2013, 2014, 2015 season when we knew Gerrard was probably coming to the end, when Brendan Rodgers was getting pelters for managing his playing time, when quite rightly he should have been managing his playing time because his legs were gone at that point. But the emotion was always he'll come back. He'll be the Liverpool manager one day. But it doesn't look like that would be the wisest decision right now, does it? He hasn't displayed anything remotely looking like earth-shattering managerial talent the way, say, Klopp did from an early time, or Mourinho did from his early years, and Alex Ferguson to kind of make that comparison. Is it going to be a case where Pep Linders steps up in the Bob Paisley fashion? Do we look back at Gerrard and say, maybe he just wasn't at the right club, or are we going to really have to look at somebody completely out of left field, as they say over here, that we may not have thought about?
Yeah, and as much as I love Stevie G, and you have to kind of look at what he did at Rangers under a bit of a different microscope. And Julian Nagelsmann is a great shout, but I think he's a guy that I don't think is leaving Germany for any time soon, unless he just gets thrown a stupid money at him. But the biggest issue I had with Gerrard is how Aston Villa 100% quit on him, and that is just like the death knell for a manager in my eyes. Like you can go through losing spells, you can go through spells of just times where there's a bit of dissent between the ranks and everything, but when pretty much an entire team quits on you, and from everything that you read about it, and you watched Villa play those last couple of games under him, they just did not give a single solitary shit about playing for him anymore, and they wanted to tank his chances of sticking around as much as possible. And look at what they've done under Unai Emery. It's been night and day, and that that doesn't bode well for him getting a. But I say that now, and there are links to him with national teams, so let him explore that route. Don't need to kind of bring him into the fold.
Rami, I want to make a slight comparison and then tie it back into to our own team. But Brendan Rodgers, an ex-Liverpool manager, had us in that great season, and then it just fell apart after that. Got a lot of criticism from a large number of Liverpool fans. Went to Celtic, hugely successful at Celtic, and then is at Leicester and hugely successful at Leicester for where they are as a club. But now times are tough. But if you look at Twitter and Facebook and the Leicester forums and all that kind of stuff, the general consensus is they are still playing for Brendan Rodgers. They're just a bit crap. Now, obviously, you want that kind of passion. So in support of, say, Pep Linders taking over, should that day come with Klopp, he seems to have a lot of backing and support from the players. He seems to be somebody who's liked by the players. Is that kind of factor going to be important at that point?
Yeah, I think that is important, and I wouldn't be surprised if, like you said, when that day comes, Pep Linders doesn't at least get an interview, if you know what I mean. I think, yeah, just his familiarity with the players already, and I don't know how much you guys watch those inside training videos, but he's always the one that's leading the drills and leading the training sessions. Klopp kind of takes a back seat, so he's already in that position where he's comfortable talking and leading players, and tactically, I think he's really astute. It's just a question of, like you said, when he is the main man and that pressure starts to come on him, and when questions start to get asked about the team, he's the one who has to answer for them. Is he the type of guy to respond to that, or is he going to crumble? And you really can't tell from until the person is in that situation. And so, yeah, I think Pep Linders is a great shout. I think he gets sometimes a lot of unfair hate online, and that always goes to show the internet's not real. It's not a real place, because I think he's really, like I said, tactically astute, and I think he's came a long way just under Klopp in the past few years. So when that time does come, I wouldn't be surprised if his name isn't thrown around.
Yeah, I just want to point out, Alan, has told us it's Brendan's 50th birthday today. I wonder how much character he had with his birthday cake. So yes, moving on to the next thing we're going to talk about tonight, which will be Brighton. All things Brighton beautiful. We have FA Cup, magic of the cup, etc., etc. We played them there recently, 3-0. Not a great game from us in any way, shape, or form. Trevor, how do you think this one will shape up?
Oh man. Every time I've tried to be positive in recent times and say certain things in regards to facing certain teams, it just blows up in my face. And Brighton is that one that has just every single time I try to oh yeah, this is the time where Brighton's gonna slip. It's a perfect time to be catching Brighton. I'm never right. I'm always incorrect. So what I'm gonna do is just hope I hit the old jinx button this evening and really say this is the time that Brighton continues to do well. And they are going to come in and they're going to not necessarily put up 3 again, but I'll say that they're going to be able to do enough to knock us out of the FA Cup, because it's turning into a bit of a bogey team, Brighton. Even in past seasons where we've kind of been firing on all cylinders, they're a team that they have that willingness to just go, okay, you want to press? We're going to do the same to you on the other end. And they have the horses to do it. And I think it's going to be a fun game for me to wake up from my hangover on Sunday and kind of slog through. And well,
Rami, where do you see the game going? Do you think Klopp is going to play full strength, or is he going to throw some kids in? You kind of have to expect that for Brighton, although they're flying high in the Premier League, that they probably want to get a good chance of getting some silverware as well. So they'll probably go full strength. So how does Klopp approach this game?
Right. Yeah, I discussed this yesterday on the morning show to Mooch, and I was like, honestly, if it was up to me, I would play the kids and just manage expectations. Like you said, Brighton's a bit of a bogey team, but he made the argument that it would be 2 weeks without a game for our main guys. And so because of that, I think Klopp probably goes strong squad just because they don't play again until the next weekend. And so probably a strong squad and maybe a little bit of youth mixed in. But like I said, for me personally, I have zero expectations for this game. We could go full strength and still lose, and who knows, maybe we could play our kids and win. It's just one of those games that, I don't have a ton of hope or expectations for, and whatever happens, happens. I'm more, if anything, focused on next week's Premier League game than I am this FA Cup. If anything, losing at this stage might be a blessing, just with the fixture congestion and the Champions League coming up. It just might be a little bit of a blessing in disguise. So, like I said, I don't want us to lose, obviously, but if it does happen, it's not the end of the world.
Let me throw this to Trevor, but you can join in after Rami, because on one hand, it almost common sense to say, we don't need the extra games, but on the other hand, losing becomes a habit, and we seem to have gotten into it, whereas winning, can cover a multitude of sins. It can get you going again. So a win would certainly be a good thing for us. A win is always a good thing. But Trevor, do you think we can throw this game away a little bit, or at least take it casually in terms of the entirety of the season, or do we really need to start getting back to winning ways as quickly as possible?
Yeah, and I think that's something that we've kind of collectively tried to work our heads around this year, of how there was always that time that the corner was going to be turned, where you're like, okay, yeah, you lost to Watford, but it's gonna come back around. Or you got knocked out early from the Champions League by Atletico Madrid, but it's gonna come back around, and there's gonna be success over there. This year we've had plenty of instances where there's been a couple of really bad results, and you're like, oh, 9-0 Bournemouth. Okay, now we're back into it. And then you have a couple results where you're like, oh, beating City. All right, now we're back on track, and then fizzles out again. It's one of those things where, are you going to just, you have to find out what your priorities are. Do you want to win something, or do you want to just optimize everything and get top 4, get as far in the Champions League as you can and get that money? And if that's the case, the FA Cup, you have to kind of just put it on the back burner. As much as, yes, winning is a habit, and getting that momentum could be huge into progressing in the other competitions, but at some point, something's got to give.
Rami, on the other hand, though, it's a nice little discussion going on in the comments. Brian Shelton says, we've got 10 points to make up and we need a fit team. But David Cosgrove says, it's full strength, win a trophy. That's what it's out. Both valid points. But in terms of the league, we're not in a good spot to get into Europe for next year, are we? Whereas the FA Cup does actually represent a good chance of being in Europe, even if it is the Europa League. That we know ourselves, a European campaign that gets to a final and hopefully wins it is always a positive for the club, isn't it?
Yeah, 100%. And I think that is a fair point that, looking at the state of the season now, the FA Cup might be our last real chance at silverware this year. So it does take on that extra bit of significance. And as you mentioned, winning does build habits. And I've noticed the last two games, we've kept a clean sheet. So if we can keep a clean sheet here, that'd be big, 3 straight, especially with the defensive problems we've had recently. And so that's kind of more what I'm looking for, just like something to like hang our hat on. But as Trevor mentioned, there's been 3 or 4 times already this season where we thought, okay, yeah, that's the turnaround game. Like you mentioned Bournemouth, you mentioned City. I remember thinking after the World Cup that Villa game was like, okay, yeah, we're back. Stuff like that. You just have had a lot this year where we're like, okay, yeah, we're starting to build good habits. And so I wouldn't hang my hat a ton on that. Like, yeah, winning is nice, but I wouldn't run the players into the ground for a FA Cup matchup in January when we still have a long season still ahead of us. And I'm sure Klopp is smart enough to manage it both. Not not put out a lineup that's going to be too strenuous on the players, or not put a player that's right back from injury, et cetera, et cetera. But I do think now that I think about it more, I think this is the type of game that if we win, who knows, maybe we could go on another cup run and end up lifting the silverware in May.
Trevor, Brighton will be hungry. They embarrassed us once already. In the comments, we had mention of revenge. Do you think the players will look at it that way, or do you think the players will maybe even be a little bit nervous that the same thing will happen again?
Yeah, there has to be that bit of trepidation. There has to be that bit of pensiveness when it's a team that just came in and pumped you the last time they played you. Even if it's in different circumstances and there's going to be different lineups and things like that, you can only look at what happened the last time you played, regardless of the distance between the two games. And I think Brighton is a team that, while we are trying to kind of find ways to give guys both days off and chances to shine, Brighton doesn't have that issue. They have guys that they can run out there day in, day out, because they're A, younger for the most part, and B, they are kind of like on the way up of the roller coaster of what we were the last couple of years in terms of the pressing system and just the way they play, and they haven't reached that breaking point yet where they need that time off, they need that maintenance, and I think it's just catching them at a bad time for us.
Rami, let's break the team down line by line, starting at the back. We'll have Trevor as well involved. Who's your goalkeeper for this weekend? Is it Allison? Is it Kelleher if he's fit, or is it Adrian if he's still alive?
I think it's going to be Allison. Simply because I don't know if there's any truth to this, but there's starting to be some transfer rumors swirling around Kelleher, and so who knows what's happening there. So I think the safer bet is Allison. Klopp's even said in a press conference earlier this season that Allison is our FA Cup keeper. I believe he was last year too. Kelleher got the League Cup games, and Allison got the FA Cup games. So I wouldn't be surprised to see Allison in goal.
Trevor, what do you think?
Yeah, if this game was on like the day after the transfer window closing, I would say Kelleher, but as it stands right now, I think it's got to be Allison.
Okay, we'll stick with Trevor for this part. Back four, how do you go?
I'll go with,
and why? Just to make it tricky.
Just to make it tricky. I'm gonna go with Simicast and Trent on the fullback positions, because I personally just want to give Robbo a day off, and Calvin Ramsey doesn't exist. And in the center,
I think he lives with Arthur Milo.
Yeah, in the void. They live in the void on the edge of space, and I'll go with Kanate and Gomez, just because you do have to deal with pacey guys when it comes to Brighton, and those are the two that I think will be able to handle that best, that are, unlike Ramsey, alive.
Rami, how do you go at the back?
Yeah, 3 of the 4 are the same for me. I think Tsimikas comes in, gives Robertson a bit of a break. Trent comes in, he didn't start against Chelsea, so I think he's due for a start. And then I would go with Konate as well. I think he has the pace. But I would go with Matip. I think those two, Konate and Matip, are going to be our partnership until Van Dijk comes back, essentially. And so just let them build a bit more chemistry together in a game that, like we said, there's not a ton at stake. So just let them, figure out, like, Konate's playing on the left now. Let him be more comfortable and then get that chemistry with Matip going.
So it would seem logical to go to the midfield, but we're not. We're going to go straight up front because it seems a bit more obvious given the injuries. Rami, where do you go up front? Let's say 4-3-3. We're going to play.
Right. I'm just trying to remember who's still fit. I think it'd be.
It's just going to be Salah and 2 clones, I think. At this point.
Yeah, exactly. Just roll a dice and pick somebody. But I think it'd be Salah on the right, Nunez up top, and then Gakpo on the left. It's crazy. Gakpo's basically started every game since he signed for us, but that's just out of necessity. But yeah, I think I'd go Nunez, Gakpo, Salah.
Trevor, how do you go in the attack?
Yeah, if Nunez is ready to go and all signs are looking like he should be, I'd go with that same 3 as well, just out of attrition.
So let me look at you, Rami, and then ask you, Trevor, who starts in midfield?
See, this is the worst one, because where your heart wants to tell you don't put the same 3 people out there, I really think he's going to go just for the try. It hurts my soul to think that Thiago and Hendo are going to play the amount of games that they play this year, but I'm just going to throw those 2 in with Bajcetic. It should be Naby Keita in there. There's so many other things. I don't want to see Harvey Elliott in that role against Brighton because he's just going to get bullied. So I'll go Bajcetic, Henderson, and Thiago, as much as that's going to hurt my brain.
Robbie, how do you go in the middle?
I think Fabinho starts. Personally, I think he's just going to hopefully play a little bit into form. And then I think Thiago is for sure starter. And then that last spot's kind of up in the air for me. You could start Bajcetic there. He's played there before. But I think Klopp's going to give Keita a chance here, especially with it being a cup game. And he's been decent the last few games that he's came in. So, yeah, I think he's going to give Keita a shot here. So then my midfield 3 would be Fabinho, Thiago, and Keita.
Well, let's talk about Keita, because we have kind of talked on the shows and on the other shows where we don't expect Keita to play because he's supposed to be gone or because he's not signing the contract, etc. But he always plays just when you least expect it. And he does put in a good performance, not the world-beating performance we were promised when he first joined, but solid enough performances. Maybe you could call them shop window performances because he wants to get to a good club. But if he plays and does well, it's kind of a conundrum then, isn't it, for us, Rami?
Yeah, it is. But, at the end of the day, the issue with Keita was never his ability. It was his availability. And like they say, availability is the best ability. And so, if he was healthy and was always available, I don't think there'd be any discussion. We would definitely be renewing him. But the issue is, when he's counted on, when we need him most, he's never there. And so, I've always been a fan of Keita. Like, I looked at his advanced stats, and compared to other midfielders his age, they're all in the 90th percentile, and he has a lot of elite abilities. It just, like I said, he never plays. It's like, and when he does play, he plays, gets injured, is out for 2 weeks or 3 or 4, whatever it is, comes back, needs 3 or 4 games just to get back up to speed. Those 4th and 5th games are great, and then he gets injured again, and it's just the cycle repeats. And so that's why I feel like, as great as he might play when we play against Brighton or in the rest of the season, I don't think it's been enough to warrant a new contract.
Trevor, what do you think on the Keita question? Is he the key to a great midfield this weekend?
I'm just gonna let that one go. And he is a conundrum, and as Rami so eloquently put, availability is the best ability. And it's not even a fact that there were times where he was injured and they're like, okay, where you're kind of 80% right now. You could go give us 20 minutes. You could go give us half an hour. And he's like, nah, I'm good. I'm just nah. And I'm like, okay. And that's what gets you left off the Champions League roster. And that's what gets you an extra 2 weeks on the sidelines when everybody thinks that you're coming back to, as Macka put it, be in the shop window because everybody thinks you're getting shipped out in January. And he's a guy that I've really tried to just put more faith in, and every single time he's let me down. So if this is his kind of like last rodeo, and he needs to just do everything he can to make sure he's playing at Dortmund and not Augsburg. No offense to Augsburg, but the I really don't care how he goes about it.
Uh, Rami, let's kind of just finish up on that topic on something that about before. Where does Thiago fit? Because he is becoming with how Fabinho's playing, with the Clemson, unavailability of Firmino. He is almost becoming the definition of the luxury player in midfield these days, isn't he?
Yeah, 100%. I feel like that's what he was brought in to do. Is just kind of we haven't really invested in that area of the field that much, so he's kind of have to been that main guy. You watch the games, and he's the one tackling and then starting the counter attacking, and just kind of like he needs some help. I feel like, but you're 100% correct. Thiago should be, especially at this age, should be the type of player that you throw on when you need to break down a low block team or similar situations like that. He should be, like you said, a luxury player, but the fact that we rely on him so much is just a bit disappointing. And that goes back to what we're saying is if Keita was a bit more reliable, we wouldn't need to rely on Thiago so much. But because of the nature of our midfield, he's become an undroppable player essentially.
Trevor, what do you think? He didn't. I mean, nobody performed with any credit really in the league game against Brighton. But is this a chance for Thiago to redeem himself, or are we going to be, coursing that? Number one, there's not a midfield around him to help him to play to his best, but also number two, that he doesn't really have the ability to take a game by the scruff of the neck in the middle.
I think he's kind of suffered the way Mo has in terms of just there's nobody there that can kind of do what he does, so he's just kind of needing to play over and over again when I don't think he's physically capable of doing it on a week to week basis anymore. And when you have a Thiago that has to kind of take his foot off the gas a little bit, that kind of ruins the Thiago experience. Because if he's not a guy that's tracking back and getting that ball and then immediately not even turning his head and then getting the ball on a line to a cutting winger, that's just there's no real point to him. And it's sad that a guy that should probably be a closer at this stage of his career, a guy that comes in and just calms things down at the ends of games and just makes a potentially messy situation very clean, having to go out there and start over and over and over and over. And I some of these games I think he's like playing through an injury because just like what we were talking about with Mo, what are you gonna do if you take him out? We've seen a couple of games this year where he wasn't in there and it was just chaos. And there's nobody knew where to be. Every single person that would try to like cut across to try to take responsibility for marking a certain guy would leave three people open behind him, and there was just nothing that could be done. And I don't know. I there's no real answers to whether or not we can kind of survive without him, and we're gonna probably find out the worst way is if he gets hurt, and then that's that.
Trevor, if you were to put a score on this weekend's game, what would it be?
2-0 to the bad guys. Jinx curse.
Rami, what do you think?
Is there a replay or does it go to penalties?
It goes to a replay, I believe, first, and then penalties.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Next
then I
round's
won't
gonna be
predict a
less
draw
fun.
then. You know, I have to back Liverpool. I'm gonna say 2-1 to us.
I'm going to say 7-0 to us, just to counteract Trevor's jinx and bring out the flavour of the jinx and make it more prominent and hopefully
More spicy,
make it spicy, make it work properly. So the last thing tonight, as always, is the famous question. So for Rami and Trevor, if you were to describe this season and also experience this season in one action, would you rather have it as a Mike Tyson punch to the face or a Roberto Carlos kick to the family jewels? How would you describe this season, Trevor?
It's 100% the kick in the dick. It's because I feel if like Mike Tyson punched me in the face, I would be dead. Where a kick from Roberto Carlos, while it would be incredibly painful, I think it would just be more weeks of uncomfortability. And that's kind of where I'm at with Liverpool, where like I don't feel comfortable watching a game anymore. But at least I'm alive.
Rami, what do you say? Is it a kick or is it a punch?
I feel like watching us this year has been both at the same time, for being honest. But I'd probably go with opposite of you, Trevor. I go with the punch just because, you know, if I survive, then at least, you know, I have a chance of, you know, passing down my lineage for future generations. But Roberto Carlos, I think the bloodline stops here if that happens. So that's kind of what I was thinking. But if I go to punch.
I would describe the season as a roundhouse kick from Chuck Norris. That's because the worst kind of roundhouse kicks.
Oh, no.
So, gentlemen, I changed to say how much for joining the week, and for everybody else for joining in with the comments and the likes, etc., etc. We will. I believe we have Monday coffee tomorrow morning. I could be wrong on that, but check it out. That's why you like our page. And our YouTube and our Facebook and our Discord, you join our channel, so you know when these things are going to happen. There's no EPL fantasy show tonight straight after us. It's off to Betty Boys for everybody, I believe. And then we will be back next week with the Monday night podcast, and we will be here on Thursday. And then if we can all cross our fingers really tightly and find as many four-leaf clovers as we can find, and do all the nice good deeds for everybody that we can do between now and the kickoff this weekend. Hopefully, we won't concede the first goal in the FA Cup match. So just remains to say, Trevor, thank you very much. Rami, thank you very much. And thank you, everybody, for watching. And we will see you all soon. Have a good evening. Peace out.
Thanks.